So first, I'm going to introduce myself. Oftentimes, I have a different person to introduce me, but since I am serving that Toastmaster role, I will go ahead and introduce myself, and then I will begin my speech, my presentation. Jessica is once again participating in the annual tradition of Advent of Code, an Advent calendar of daily coding challenges. This year, however, she is doing as many of the challenges as possible purely in Microsoft Excel. Has she excelled at Excel so far? Let's find out. Please welcome Jessica. I'd like to wish you all happy holidays, and I hope that you have a very wonderful holiday season ahead, no matter what you may be celebrating. For me, one of my favorite holiday traditions this time of year is to participate in the Advent of Code programming challenges. This is an Advent calendar that gives anyone who wants to participate a different coding challenge to solve every day of December up until Christmas. If you want to check it out on your own, you can go to adventofcode.com and log in to get your own version of the Advent calendar. So today, as I speak, I want to introduce you to this Advent of Code so that you can learn more about it if you are interested. I want to share my experience using Excel by walking you through my solution to one of the day's problems. And my overall goal here is to leave all of you with an encouragement to try something new this holiday season. So let's get started by looking at one of the specific puzzles that I chose to solve this year. In Advent of Code, every year there is a particular theme to keep it fun. This year, the theme is that you are riding around in a submarine trying to somehow save Christmas once again. So for one of the problems this year, as an example, the submarine has been making some odd creaking noises. So we have to run a diagnostic report. The diagnostic report will consist of a list of binary numbers, which when decoded properly can tell you many useful things about the conditions of the submarine. We're going to check the power consumption first. You need to use the binary numbers in the diagnostic report to generate two new binary numbers, the gamma rate and the epsilon rate. The power consumption can then be found by multiplying those two rates together. And then it proceeds with some more instructions about how to calculate the gamma rate and the epsilon rate. So because I wanted to solve this in Excel, my first step was to get my puzzle input here, a list of binary numbers, and copy it into Excel. And the very first thing I learned was that if you just take a list of binary numbers and blindly copy it into Excel, Excel will helpfully try to format the numbers for you, remove all the leading zeros, and give me all this nonsense that doesn't help me because I need to look at each of the digits individually. So the first thing I learned was that you have to format the cells as text and paste them in keeping target formatting in order to get all of the ones and zeros to show up appropriately. So right off the bat, I had to learn something new about Excel, which was great because one of my purposes in trying to solve these problems in Excel was so that I could learn more about Excel. I also like a challenge. So that was another one of my motivating factors in doing this, is I had heard about people in the past using Excel to solve Advent of Code coding challenges. And here I am as a developer using things like Java and JavaScript. That's too easy. I wanted the challenge of using Excel. So my first challenge had been conquered. I learned about pasting and keeping target formatting so I can have all of the digits in my binary numbers show up. Now, the next thing I had to do is for this particular puzzle, I have to look at each digit of the binary numbers independently. So instead of having them all in one column, I've decided to split them out into different columns. So that's where the lovely text to columns feature comes in. I had used this feature before, but I'd always done this delimited option. I learned about the fixed width option. where I can say, I want each of these individual digits just by clicking here. I want them to each be split into their own column. So the next thing I learned was about different ways to convert one column into multiple columns with this text to columns feature. After I did that, I ended up with something that looked a bit like this, with each row being one of the binary numbers and each column being an individual digit. So now I have the data in the format that I wanted. Now, what am I actually supposed to do with this data? Well, the puzzle has asked me to create two new binary numbers. One of those binary numbers is supposed to be built from the most common digits in each column, and the other one is supposed to be built from the least common digits in each column. Okay, so now I have my individual digits. So now I want to find which digit is the most common across all of these numbers. And what I chose to do, I'm sure there are many ways to do this, but I chose to use average because it's all zeros and ones. I know that if I average out the whole list of zeros and ones, if that average is greater than 0.5, 1 is the most common. If it's less than 0.5, 0 is the most common. So then I was able to do the average, use my little if statement in Excel to say if it's greater than 0.5, make it a 1. If it's less than 0.5, make it a 0. Do the opposite for the least common. And then I end up with all of these digits here, the most common digits and the least common digits. Next. So now I have my binary most common digits and my binary least common digits. Any questions? Anyone want clarification before okay, we're good. At least those who are giving me indication are good. So now I want to convert the binary to decimal. So I could just say this times 2, this times 1, this times 2, this times 4, this times 8, but that's a lot of manual figuring out those multipliers. So instead, what I did is I used the power of Excel once again to have a formula to calculate the values of each digit in decimal. So I started on the right with 1, and then I just multiplied each prior column by 2. So then I got all of these lovely multipliers for converting my decimal numbers into, or my binary numbers into decimal. And then I could take each of my digits in this most common row and multiply them by the multiplier. So L column or L row 1003 times L row 1 and so on. And the thing that I learned here that I didn't know about before with Excel, because I'm an Excel newbie, is the dollar sign. So I learned that if you put a dollar sign into a formula, then that value after the dollar sign will be fixed if you copy paste the formula. So that means that I can take this formula here that I did to find the value of the most common digits, and I can copy paste it down below, and it will update these rows that don't have the dollar sign, but it will keep the rows that do have the dollar sign the same. So that was something that I learned, next thing that I learned from using Excel. And then I have my two numbers, and the problem wanted me to multiply them together to get the final result. So I've conquered part 1 of day 3 in Excel. Every advent of code does have 2 parts, and the second part is always more complicated than the first. So now for the second part, what they asked me to do was, instead of finding the most common and least common digits overall across all of the data, they asked me to do filtering along the way. So they wanted me to find out which of the leftmost digits is the most common, and then filter out the data set so that only data with that most common digit remains. And then with that remaining data, I'm supposed to look at which digit is the most common in that second column, and then filter only to numbers that have that digit in the second column. So each step for each digit, you reduce the data set that you're working with. So I thought, oh, this is no problem. I know how to filter in Excel. I just highlight all of these columns, I click filter, and away we go. I look at the first column. I see that the average was 0.49. Therefore, 0 is more common. I want to eliminate all the ones and be left with all of the zeros. Away we go. Except average doesn't take into account that filtering. I learned that average doesn't care what you filtered out. It will still find the average of all of the data, and I don't want that. I am supposed to look at the newly filtered data. So this is where I learned about subtotal. I learned that with subtotal, I can apply functions to filtered data. So here's the difference. You can see this here I'm using average. Here I'm using subtotal. Subtotal updates when the data is filtered. So if I just replace all of my averages with subtotals, then I can get the results that I want. And all of these other columns down here, I cheated and already converted them to subtotal. So now I can continue on using my subtotals. I click on the filter. I can see that my subtotal is 0.52. So I eliminate the zeros. I'm left with the ones. And I can continue on my way through the magic of subtotal until I eventually will get down to just one number remaining, applying my filters all the way down the line. So I learned a lot about Excel that I didn't know before just from solving this one problem. I learned about how to paste data in. I learned about how to split data up into multiple columns. I learned about the $ in formulas, and I learned about subtotal, all things that I did not know before. And that's what I've really enjoyed about doing Advent of Code in Excel, is that I've learned new things, I've challenged myself, and I've gotten a better appreciation for those who maybe don't have the tools like Java and JavaScript in their toolbox. So for those reasons, I encourage all of you to also try something new this holiday season. You don't necessarily need to try to program in Excel, but I would challenge you to perhaps try out Advent of Code if you haven't done it before. Learn a new programming language, read a book about some sort of technical topic. Whatever you choose to do, I think that you will have a great time, and I definitely hope that you excel at it.